everyone, and welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be reviewing Catch-22 and D.O.C., the 17th and 18th episodes from Season 3 of Lost. We open up to a vision by Desmond where we see Charlie dying with an arrow to the neck, only to find out that there's a series of events that lead up to this that Desmond eventually wants to recreate. So he goes up to Hugo and tells him that somebody is coming to the island and it's very important, which takes us into our flashback where we see that Desmond has vowed silence for an undisclosed amount of time, but because of this, has been accepted into the Brotherhood of a monastery. And even though they never thought that he was going to make it, he had proved them all wrong. This takes us back to the beach, where Desmond uses his past with Jack to be able to get the first aid kit without questions asked, even though Hurley almost blows it all by saying that he and Desmond are friends. I really like Desmond and Hurley together in this episode. They're really fun, and they kind of play off each other really well. But I did want to point out really quickly here, if you don't remember, that Desmond and Jack are the only characters to have any sort of direct contact off the island and actually remember it. Also, consider that they both come to the island separately. That gives them a really unique relationship, and we haven't seen a lot of them interacting since Desmond left the hatch. Now, before Hurley continues to go with Desmond's plan, he makes Desmond tell him what's going on. He knows that Desmond is able to see some sort of flashes and wants to have some insight. But what he finds out is that Des wants to ensure that what happened in the flashes actually occurs. So Hurley agrees to go along with Desmond's plan, and they go to try to assemble the people needed for this trip. The first person they go to address is Jin, and I really love that the way that they convince Jin is by Hurley going over to him and telling him about a camping trip. And this shows you that Hurley is a very trustworthy person to these people because they're very willing to accept what he says without very much questioning. I really like this exchange. He gets Jin to come along. Desmond sees this charade and goes, "I'll try it on Charlie." But Charlie, very much capable of understanding English, knows that Desmond has seen flashes of him dying and is obviously very skeptical of this trip. He knows it's not for camping, he knows it's for something else, and is just wanting Desmond to tell him why. Charlie eventually agrees to go with Desmond, and they set out on their trip. Along the way, Jin does find that wire and gets really excited when they find out that they're going to set up camp. And I just enjoy how giddy he is to camp with these people. Now let's go to our flashback where it's 1995 and we learn that from the vintage on the bottle. Desmond is questioning the name that they use for their wine to the head brother, who explains to him that he seems to be underestimating the value of sacrifice. And I think that this whole scene is supposed to be an analogy to his silence. That vow of silence that he took, he didn't understand why he did it. He just went there and did it and waited it out. And the head brother tells him something here. He says that you don't understand the value of sacrifice, which is funny given the extremes that we've seen Desmond go through by staying in the hatch and pressing the button for so many years. And as he's having this conversation with the head brother, a man comes in to see him and punches him right in the nose, asks for forgiveness, and steps out. What the heck is going on with Desmond? This is pretty nuts. We now return to the beach where we see Kate trying to rekindle a conversation with Jack. What ends up happening is he just kind of gives her the cold shoulder and leaves her alone and walks off into the night. Talks about how it's weird to be back, but then really doesn't share much more with her and goes to be with Juliet, which is interesting because this turns her back to Sawyer, who had previously tried to hook up with her in the most unsuccessful way possible and in the least Sawyer smooth way possible. So really interesting to see her get rejected by Jack and then turn around to Sawyer. I wonder if her motivation was to make Jack jealous or if it was just to feel some sort of attention from somebody. We now return to the camping trip where Jin is telling ghost stories, and this whole scene just makes me laugh. But the main thing to take away from this scene is that Desmond does share who Penelope is with Charlie, and I believe that that's the first time that he's ever done that with anybody on the island. But he has faith that she is still looking for him because she had told him she would never stop looking for him. As he's saying this, he hears a chopper go down in the water. Desmond furiously wants to go after it, but Charlie threatens him by not going. He says that if what your vision said was true and I need to be there to ensure that it happens, we're going to wait until morning. But I do want to bring up that in the flash that Desmond saw, it was day when Charlie died. So I wonder if maybe Charlie is leading himself into his own demise. This takes us into the flashback again, where Desmond goes and visits Ruth, the woman that he walked out on a week before their wedding, and he explains that he had to sacrifice everything for a greater calling. However, this woman points out what I think we're all starting to learn about Desmond, is that when he gets to the point where he's right there with somebody, he runs away. He is a coward and just sacrifices it all because he does not believe he's man enough. So she calls him out on it. She tells him that the reason you joined this brotherhood wasn't a greater calling. It was because you were too darn scared to go through with it and too darn scared to just tell me that you didn't want to. This takes us back to the beach where Sawyer challenges Jack to a game of ping pong. And in this game realizes through the comments Jack made that Kate was using him either to make Jack jealous or whatever, but she was using Sawyer, not really seeking him out for sex. Really interesting scene. I love that we get to continue to see Sawyer's intelligence even when he's not in the forefront. This takes us into the jungle, where I want you to notice the clouds in the background as they're walking across the beach. And remember what's happening when Charlie died. So this makes me think if Charlie would have gone earlier when Desmond wanted to go at night, would they have avoided the series of events that led to Charlie's death in that flashback? It's probable, but like Desmond had said at the beginning of the episode, he wants to ensure that everything occurs the same way it did in his flash, because he believes that this person is coming for him, one way or another. But as they're walking, Charlie tells Desmond that if he would have known that this person was possibly Penelope, he would have gone along with him, no questions asked. And he would have done everything he could to make sure that they were reunited. So totally on Desmond's side without needing to be lied to. And I think that this is interesting because he says, I would have done whatever it takes. But Charlie is being lied to here. For him, it's literally life or death. But it really makes a lot of sense for him not to trust Desmond, because what we know is that Desmond is potentially making sure that Charlie is going to die here, which leads us to Hurley's comment about Desmond warning them about the rain so that they could have brought an umbrella. And this really talks about the idea of free will, which is a big theme for Hume, the philosopher, not just Desmond Hume, the character. That free will, is it really existing or is it just an illusion? Because in this case, he knows exactly what's going to happen, but he's choosing not to change it even though it's going to kill Charlie. And it's really living up to what the term Catch-22 means, which is again the title of this episode. We now jump back to the flashback where we see Desmond, after being called a coward, drinking some of that wine that he helped bottle with the head brother. The head brother walks into the room, notices what happens, and fires Desmond promptly because he tells him he's not meant to be here, that God does have bigger plans for him. And what I like in this scene is Desmond asks him, what do I do now? And the guy responds, whatever's next. And I think that really ties into something later on in the episode. But before I leave this scene, I want you guys to think about some of the parting words that the brother told Desmond. He says, you're spending too much time running away to realize what you might be running toward, which I think is just true, literally and figuratively. Desmond is literally running away from all of his problems. That's all he ever does. Manages to put himself in a position where he's just separated from all of his problems, but also he's not looking at what's in front of him because he's constantly focused on what's behind him. We now return to the jungle where we have already seen the future and we watch it happen in front of us. So we now have seen the perspective of how Desmond sees his flashes and how he's able to see the future. So in the same way that Desmond's consciousness is able to time travel and see this thing occur before it happens, we do too. Now imagine how much confusion Desmond must have and what he should do when it comes to saving Charlie. And Desmond even brings it up to Charlie as they're walking through the jungle. He tells him that it seems to be pointless to keep trying to save Charlie because no matter what he's done so far, it keeps trying to happen. He keeps almost dying, and that maybe he's failing some sort of test, just like the test put on Abraham, that he just should let Charlie die and believe that nothing will happen. But again, he doesn't understand really the value of that test. I think he is meant to keep helping Charlie, otherwise, why would you see those visions? It's a matter of faith. Very interesting. He still doesn't understand how he's failing. We now return to the flashback where Desmond is leaving the Brotherhood for good. And one thing I want you to take away from this scene, pay attention to the portrait on this man's desk. It has a picture of him and the woman from the ring shop that told Desmond that the only thing that he's ever done of value in his life was going to that island. So I did want you guys to realize that there is a connection here between these two characters, and that Lost isn't just going to show you these guys for no good reason. And maybe there's something else at play here, because why else would this woman be shown with this man? And this ties back to the comment, whatever's next. Does he have some sort of strange insight like she did on whatever's going to happen next in his life? Who's to say? We have no evidence to that, but we have seen these two characters literally pictured together. Anyway, Desmond leaves the monastery and meets Penny. And it seems like that comment of whatever's next is really set up here for a perfect smack, because this is just boom, boom, boom. He gets into this monastery after leaving his potential wife, and then his wife's brother comes and punches him in the face, causing him to go get drunk, which causes him to get kicked out of the monastery, and then causes the meeting between him and Penny, which is the series of events that leads him down to the island. Pretty crazy stuff to end this episode with, and to see how Desmond's life really ties up together. So they get this down. So they get the woman down, but they find out it's not Penny like he had hoped it was or believed that it was. It's actually another woman who seems to know his name and had a picture of him on her. Pretty crazy and really, really intense. This episode had a lot going on in it, a lot to learn about Desmond and his past, and a little bit of stuff mixed in and out of the episode that's really, really cool. Before I move on, I'd mentioned that we were going to talk about Catch-22 at the end of last episode, so I did want to bring up what this book is. Because we all know what the saying a Catch-22 means, but the book itself is very similar to the show Lost. It uses a distinctive, non-chronological, third-person omniscient narration that is describing events from the points of view of the different characters. The separate storylines are all out of sequence, so the timeline is developing with the plot, which I think is something that we're seeing very clearly in how Lost is telling their story. And this will take us over to D.O.C, where we open up to Jack checking in with Sun at her garden, making sure that everything is okay with her pregnancy, because remember what we had learned, every woman who's gotten pregnant on this island dies. Which will take us right into our first flashback of the episode, where we see a newlywed Jin and Sun getting settled into their home. And I really enjoy watching them actually be in love as newlyweds. It's really beautiful. Now this is very important, because I think the reason that they're showing us their relationship really early on like they are here is because they mean to illustrate a big point that we have learned about Jin and Sun, which is the dishonesty between the two. Because in this flashback, we see that Jin and Sun start having issues because they can't disclose to each other everything that's happened. Sun is trying to get a little bit more information from Jin about what happened to his parents and his past, and Jin starts to be how we remembered him in the first season, very cold and upset with her. And we can start to see that this is the reason these two had issues in their life, because she wouldn't just tell Jin that his mother came up and threatened him to spare him the shame, and he wouldn't tell her that his parents are still alive to spare himself the shame. So Jin and Sun are both kind of doing the same thing to each other, like we said and seen in the past. This takes us back to the boys in the jungle who run into Mikael out of nowhere, who is apparently still alive. What the hell? How did he seem to survive that crazy sonar fence? He's there, he's a field medic, so he offers to patch up the woman in exchange for his freedom. Nobody likes this agreement, but they're really kind of stuck in this situation. This woman has a satellite phone and a way to possibly get them off the island, so they have to agree to him working on her. We now return to our flashback, where Sun finds out that Jin is actually the son of a prostitute, and he's a bastard, and that his father might not even be his real father, but rather the boy was just left with him, and so he raised Jin as his own, because what else could he do? This man truly had compassion for the boy, but doesn't want him to know what had happened and where he came from. Now, while all this flashback stuff is happening in the main story on the beach, we're seeing Sun figuring out that women die on this island when they get pregnant. So she and Juliet are going to go see what the date of conception is, which is what D.O.C. stands for. Apparently, back at that medical station that they were at, there is an ultrasound. So Juliet will be able to determine the date of conception for Sun, which will give them a lot of information. One of them being who the actual father of the child is, and whether or not she will die on the island. We return to our flashback, where Sun goes to her father and threatens him with revealing everything he's done to the authorities if she doesn't give him the money. And again, instead of just telling him honestly, just like that glass ballerina, what happened, she lies to him, comes up with a scenario, and requests that money. Now, he is able to realize that that's for Jin, and says that if you cannot tell me what this is for, then your husband will bear the burden of this request. And she takes the money and walks off in a very stubborn manner. And now we're starting to see where this relationship between Jin and her father really turned as well, because he is the one that's going to benefit from the money. He's going to be the one that works it off. So now let's return to the jungle, where Desmond and Mikael have finished doing the operation or the procedure, whatever you want to call it, on this woman, and she says something to him in a different language. So I looked it up, it's Portuguese, and what she says is, "I am not alone." So he lies to Desmond and tells him that she said, "Thank you very much." We now return to the medical station, where this episode actually has a catch-22 in and of itself. We find out that if Jin is the father of the baby, that Sun is going to die, but if she did get pregnant off the island, that means that baby isn't Jin's. So either way, she loses. We now return to our flashback, where Sun lies to Jin about the money that she's borrowed from her father, tells him that it's because he wanted them to have nice things in their brand new apartment. Now, this brings up a really interesting point between these two characters. Again, we know that they consistently lie to each other, but we also see that he doesn't want to have to bear the burden of any gifts from Sun's father. Even though he tells her he doesn't want to be indebted, Sun still takes that money and uses it to pay off the woman who we find out is actually his mother. So again, this whole relationship is predicated on all the lies that they tell each other. And when they aren't lying to each other, that's when they're the most in love. But very interesting to see them start that foundation of lying right after they got married. We now return to the medical station, where we find out that Jin is actually the father of their baby. And even though this means that Sun is going to die, she is happy because it's Jin's. And this scene straight up made me cry. If it didn't make you cry, I don't know, you ain't got no heart. So as they leave the arrow hatch, Sun tells Juliet that she gave her good news. And that's something that Juliet had confessed to Sun she hadn't been able to do since coming to this island. So they both get to have something that they wanted here. Sun is able to actually know that her child is from Jin, and Juliet's able to finally have a woman be happy to find out that they're pregnant on the island. Really great scene, and it's a really awesome exchange that they have here, which then takes us into our scene where Juliet returns to the arrow and reports to Ben. And we had almost forgotten that she was still working with them. However, when Juliet is done recording her report, she adds a personal note that she hates Ben, showing that she doesn't necessarily agree with everything that she's doing here. This takes us back to the jungle, where the woman from the helicopter wakes up and tells Hugo that Flight 815 was actually found, and that everybody inside Flight 815 was found dead. How could that be possible? Everybody from Flight 815 is there on the island, and we've seen from the flame that everybody from the flight is actually who they say they are. So what is this woman doing? Is she lying to Hurley, or is something else going on? And with that, we get to the end of our episode, folks. Next week, we will be covering the brig and the man behind the curtain. Email me, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. Any thoughts, theories, questions, anything you want answered about Lost. If you guys want to follow me, I'm on Twitter @KingLordBryan. But in the meantime, you folks have a good rest of your week. Thank you, and bye-bye.